Let me give you an earworm about gardening, farming, homesteading, even growing houseplants, because it refers to soil and plants. So what's an earworm? I'm not talking about the worm that's found on an ear of corn. That is called corn earworm, but I'm not talking about an insect. I'm talking about an earworm, or an idea, a thought that gets put in your head that you can't shake. Imagine a jingle. That's why advertisers use it, because once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Are you ready? Here it is. Pests, disease, even weeds are not the problem. They're actually pointing us to the problem. We could regard pests, insects, and disease and weeds as our professors, not our problems. They're teachers sent free by nature for us to get our house in order, to get our crop in order, to get our garden in order. Why? They are there to point to the real problem. The pest is not the problem. The insect is not the problem. The disease is not the problem. Even the weed is not the problem. You get it? So you're telling me that these and these are not the problem? No, they are trying to point you to the root cause of the problem. Really get down to why. We don't ask why enough. Why do I have an insect? Why do I have an insect or a disease? Why do I have this weed? This is not new. This has been, geez, it's not my discovery. It's not a new discovery. It's been known for a long time. I discovered it actually from the writings of Sir Albert Howard, written in the 1940s. He pointed it out very clearly in several of his books. The pest is not the problem. That's why I repeat it. And you know what? If you look farther back, even the Bible talks about adding manure to a fig tree that wasn't producing. Well, why wasn't it producing? That was the thing. They understood and asked, why? Well, I know what I can do to make it better. And listen, they weren't the first to discover it. It was common knowledge. People have known, I suspect, as long as people have been doing some form of agriculture, they've understood that, hey, I have an insect, hey, I have a disease, or I have a weed. There is a reason why, and here's how I can remedy it. We've known for a long time that plants that are lacking something are more susceptible to insects and disease. Yes. What is that something? This is where nowadays we have tools that will help us far more than what people ever had in the past, where it was just observation. People on the land had a much keener sense of observation. Today we have tools. The fanciest tool and the most, I'd say, up-to-date, but tool is the same thing that if you aren't feeling well and you go, really not well, I gotta go see the doctor. One of the first things the doctor will do is order a blood test. Why? Because in your blood is a record of what you've eaten, what you haven't eaten, what you've been exposed to. The same idea can now be applied to plants. We can basically do a plant blood test. It's called sap analysis, where we can take leaves, take samples like taking a blood sample. Obviously, yeah, and there's not a lot of blood in one leaf, but you take a collection of leaves, you send them off for a sap analysis, and it gives, just like a blood type, what this plant has been eating, what it hasn't been eating, what it hasn't had access to, what the soil could be like, and what the soil and soil life are actually giving to the plant so that it will be in the state of health that it is. That's the most up-to-date technique. There are others, not so modern, but that haven't been around for that long, and one of them is a refractometer. Very simple, pretty inexpensive tool you can use, and it's used quite a bit, especially in grapes, where all you would do is take a drop of the juice from the grape, put it on the refractometer, and then you look into the sun. Well, I could see I've got a 10 Brix. Definitely too low. You don't want to be picking these grapes yet. You want to be picking grapes when they're in the really the 15 to 20 Brix level range. It's a tool that will measure the sugar content of fruit. You can use it for any fruit. You could use it for tomatoes. And then combining that with a Brix chart to give you a good idea of what is the state of health of your plant. Is it strong enough Brix, high enough Brix sugar to fight insects and disease? And it'll give you a pretty good idea of the immunity or the immune system strength of your plant. There is another one you could do that's tissue sample. You take leaves, send them off. They're not measuring nearly the amount of nutrients in a leaf as a sap analysis. It's an older technique, been used for quite a while, but it's definitely not as precise as a sap analysis. And then the oldest technique, which honestly is kind of outdated now, is a soil test. And people still say, oh yeah, you got to get a soil test. A soil test will give you an idea of the major nutrients, a few of the minor nutrients, but it really is lacking in the micronutrients. Micronutrients could be something like boron or molybdenum or manganese, copper, cobalt. Those are usually in concentrations of parts per million. But when you have insect damage or disease, it's usually due to one or more micronutrients not being available enough to the plant. So these are tools, and tools are super important and useful to give us an idea of why this plant has this insect. And this Japanese beetle. Why? Well, I know the plant is pretty good, but it's not there to be at its best level where it will absolutely repel these insects. Let's look at a few examples. I said the pest is not the problem. The disease is not the problem. The weed is not the problem. Well, hey, I've got this plant that's very often considered a weed, dandelion, or dandelion, depending where you're from. And the simplest thing, if you've been brainwashed by ads, you associate weed, I gotta solve it, bam, weed killer. Put a weed killer, get rid of dandelion because it's a problem. It's not. It's an indicator, and it's a great indicator. I suspect, highly likely, in this spot, your soil may be lacking in calcium, at least the topsoil. That's why they have such long roots. I did a video on dandelion to explain it's a great indicator. Another example, here's a pest. Aphids. Oh, what do? If you've been brainwashed by ads, you got a problem. I need something against aphids. You want to kill them. Why? Well, because I don't want aphids on my plant. Yeah, but you say, you know what? You've progressed. You no longer reach for the chemical version or the synthetic chemicals. Now you say, I'm looking for an organic solution against the aphids. So to do what? To kill them. Okay, so you still want to kill them, right? Yeah. Oh, okay. What about if you look at them as an indicator? You're not asking why. Why do I have that pest? I know why I'm having this pest on this plant. I don't have it on fruit trees surrounding me. There should be aphids on the fruit trees. No, but they're on this plant. Why? Because it's a sunflower plant. In the sunflower family, it's perennial sunflower. And you know what? It's just too shady here for a sunflower plant. And so these plants have gradually been getting weaker over the years, And the aphids are really there to basically eliminate it. It shouldn't be here. The conditions have changed from when I planted this and this was wide open. Now it's getting closer to woodland. Sunflowers just, unless woodland sunflower, most sunflowers just do not grow in this amount of shade. I'm trying to find apple scab and I can't find any apple scab. This is pear scab. It's not exactly the same, close enough, but I'll describe it for apple scab. So every disease, there is a reason for it. And we're now knowing that, at least with apple scab, it's due to a lack of cobalt. How much cobalt is running around in the soil and in the air? Tiny, tiny amounts. We're talking parts per million. And if it's 2 parts per million lacking in the soil, that disease can show up. Why? Because the plant is just not exactly nourished enough to form a really good, strong, waxy surface. Waxes, oils, fats on a plant are a sign of good health. A fat animal is a sign of good health. Not always the case with people, but for plants, you want that fat or that wax to be there. It's a protective layer. And if it just doesn't form properly or not enough, it's because there isn't enough, in this case, of cobalt. And that brings us to the real crux. Let me give you a little primer on the whole notion of limiting factor. This is not new. It's been written about in the 1800s, and the one who's popularized the idea was Justus von Liebig. And it became known as Liebig's law of the minimum. And really it referred to a plant will grow until it's limited by one element. I talked about cobalt, but it could be nitrogen, it could be phosphorus, it could be whatever the element that is in short supply at that moment. Just to be very precise, Liebig's law of the minimum states, and let me quote it, that the growth is dictated not by the total resources available, but by the scarcest resource, or the limiting factor. That's where that whole idea of limiting factor came from. It's a brilliant realization. So basically, a plant can grow until I'm short of one thing. If you provide that element, it will grow again until it's short of something else. And so on and so on. Now, just because it's short doesn't mean it's not going to grow. It can grow, but it can grow in a way that compromises probably its immune system. Yeah, you can usually tell. Sometimes the leaf color will be different, the veins will be a different color, but overall it just shows that yes, it grew, but it was compromised, and it won't be as strong or as healthy as it could be in that zone. So here, for example, you would have, during that period, it grew, but it was compromised. It didn't have enough of a certain element. And then later on, it could do better, like it did better here. If your approach is, oh, I had an insect, I better get out the insecticide, you're probably making the problem worse. Why? Because by applying an insecticide, you probably will kill, maybe not, the insect that actually was making the damage, but you are very likely also killing its natural predators, which are found usually not that far away. So what you're doing is you're kicking the can down the road. You're postponing the real problem. Why? Because what happened? You never asked why. Why do I have this insect? On some of our plants, I know that the damage isn't caused by an insect which is there to affect the plant. It's because we have so many bees that look for leaf material to build their nest that they actually eat some of the leaves. They don't eat them, they just cut them out as nest material. So if I misdiagnose that this is a pest, well, what do you want to do? Start killing your bees? No! We don't ask why. Just look at how you search. You have a problem. I have aphids, for example. I have aphids. Your search may very well likely be, how do I get rid of aphids? When you should really be searching, why do I have aphids? Or what are the causes for aphids on a rose bush? That's an actually more precise search, and you'd actually be getting closer to the real reason why. Aphids, I said, they are actually an indicator, and they're a really good indicator that your plant probably has an improper amount of ammonia in the tissue. And ammonia really attracts aphids. Why do you have ammonia in the tissue of your plant? The aphids are trying to tell you. Why? Well, you have to go back a little bit. You probably applied too much nitrogen. Even too much compost can do it. So, well, what do I do then? If you say get rid of them, the easiest way to get rid of them is stop applying nitrogen for a few months, maybe a year, maybe a couple years. That plant doesn't need that much nitrogen, which then builds up as ammonia, and the aphids are trying to tell you, knock, 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 too much. We see this problem repeated in society. Hey, we have this problem. Let's fix it with the quick fix. Maybe, oh, you know what? There's a deficit. No problem. Let's print more money and we'll solve the problem. We'll deal with the inflation in the future. We'll deal with the mounting debt in the future. What is it? It's really a kick the can down the road. And so when you're looking with growing plants, it's the same approach. I have a problem, boom, here's a solution. Kick the can to next year. Oh, I have this weed, boom, solve it. Kick the can down the... You've never responded. You've never addressed why do you have them. You're kicking the can down the road. What happens? You really become like that hamster on the hamster wheel, and you're just running. We see a problem, we react. We look to wipe out the messenger without asking why. What are we doing? We're putting it off later in the season. We don't care what the consequences in the future will be. Next season, this season probably. We don't care about how it'll affect the soil. We don't care about how it'll affect the soil life. Well, I care. That's why I make these videos, because I want you to start to realize that, you know, the pest, maybe it's not the problem. That weed, maybe it's not the problem. That disease, maybe it's not the problem. I care for nature and all the parts that don't have a voice. Do I have all the answers? Absolutely not. But understanding the complexities of nature is really a lifelong pursuit. But there are certain patterns that emerge if you take a long enough time frame and look at it from that perspective. I love my audience. I care for you, and I want really what's best for you. Even if that means sometimes I body slam you into the boards, because getting the truth is not always easy, and sometimes it disturbs. And disturbing is disturbing. But I know for the long term, it's what is really best. And I hope that this earworm will chew at you. That's my prayer for you, that it would bother you, disturb you, until you change directions. Change away from things that really destroy the natural system, compromise the food you eat, and turn to a direction that is really more aligned to nature.